I'm looking forward to today. It's part 2 from last month, and Deirdre always puts together a great team, and I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you for
Everybody?
lunch. Thank you for lunch.
Oh, you're very welcome for lunch. All right, so in return for the free lunch, the only thing that we ask for is lots of questions and feedback. It's difficult to be a presenter and feel like you're giving a webinar when you have a live audience. That's the way we put that. So feedback is a good thing. Deirdre Wheatley-Liss, I'm a principal here at Porzio. We welcome you here. We put on this series every other month as a way of supporting our local business community. And it's really a two-way street. We like the opportunity to talk to you about things that our clients are asking us about. And we really appreciate the questions because that gives us feedback as to what you as business owners, where your concerns really lie, because the world of legal concerns can be infinite, the world of business concerns can be infinite, but where they intersect on the Venn diagram to be able to say, here's where we need to do something actionable about a legal issue, that's what we want to be able to help people to be able to do. While we're talking here today, again, any questions, please let us know. So cybersecurity, how did this come into play? Kathy Koloff here, sort of the inception of part of our cybersecurity practice. She gave a talk like 3 years ago, which scared the bejesus out of me. And since then, I've had clients that have had cybersecurity issues that have called. I had one who had his data ransomed, I guess, and he had to pay in bitcoins for doing something. I've had others who lost secure data. And then, who do we have to notify about what? And as an attorney, you never want to say to your clients, I have actually no idea what it is that we need to do. So we started looking into this and developing cybersecurity as an area of practice. When it comes to, why is this so relevant? I recently gave a talk with the gentleman who's head of cybersecurity for the state of New Jersey. I'm a former CIA agent, so I have no idea what he did in his former life. He was not very forthcoming. And Dr. Rodriguez shared that the state of New Jersey website, the nj.gov website, and all of its attendant sub-websites have 1.4 billion malicious inquiries a day. 1.4 billion malicious inquiries a day, right? So these are just programs that are set up to go out there on the internet and say, hey, is there anything that we can find if we're sniffing around it? Are we able to find data? I would suggest to you that New Jersey's security for its data is probably a little bit more robust than all of our security, including probably Porzio's security. So these things that exist out there, and the other thing that's important about this is that these were not hackers that are, targeting the state of New Jersey. These are just programs that are out there running just to see what it is that they can find. And that's the scariest thing about it, because it's not a sense of, well, they're never going to go after my company because I have a small company. They're not targeting you. They're just trying to see if they can get their hands on some data. And the problem is that as smaller companies, we are likely to have data stored in a way that it's more likely for somebody to be able to target. Now, why do we care? Well, we care because the FTC cares, the Federal Trade Commission. There is no federal law governing cybersecurity. There's no great statute that says here's what it is that you need to be able to do. There's nothing for us to follow. But the FTC has essentially come out to say that if a company has a data breach of any kind, that comes under is this an unfair act that they are perpetrating on consumers. So if you lose the data, if the data is stolen, if your employee walks away with the data, have you committed an unfair act? And if you have committed an unfair act, the Federal Trade Commission has said, we're going to be the watchdogs. We're going to be looking after you. In addition to that, certain other types of information have their own kind of concerns that are around them. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is what should you be doing just from a corporate governance standpoint. I realize you may be the only corporate governance person. You may have multiple hats that you wear, but the FTC wants to see that you've taken reasonable steps. New Jersey wants to see that you've taken reasonable steps. So what do we do? The first thing I have on here, mow down the silos, be proactive. Cybersecurity needs to be everybody's problem in your organization. And if your organization is just you and then you work with consultants or contractors, they are part of your organization. You need to have taking steps to be reasonable part of your everyday thing. You would never open up an email from somebody who says, I'm in Nigeria, and if I give you, I'll give you $1 million if only you send me $1,000. We need to make sure that your employees don't open up that exact same email, or the contractors that you work with don't open up that exact same email. Everybody who has any kind of executive authority in your organization, whether they're a finance person, an operations person, a salesperson, needs to be thinking about data protection as part of everything that they do. You need to make it as part of your culture for what it is that you're doing. Now we're going to talk about different policies that we can go into. One of the websites that I have up here, cyber.nj.gov, they have an awesome checklist of what you should be doing as an employer, as a business owner, in order to be more secure for what you're doing. And what they did is they actually took it from the NSA website and is targeted for New Jersey. So if you're looking for what is reasonable for me to be secure, that's a website that I recommend that you come to. And the printout that you have is actually for the next presentation, not for this one. So if you're looking for this slide, you're not crazy, it's not there. So that's one thing that to be able to look at. Another thing I want to highlight on here is the idea of having some kind of written compliance plan. So when you are working with people, that you have a policy for them for what is your cybersecurity policy. Now that may be an employee policy, an employee handbook, and we talked about that a lot at the last seminar that we had, and we will be discussing that again in great detail on November 15th if you have a desire to be hearing more about that. But it's to have policies in place because, again, from the FTC, from the government's perspective, have you taken reasonable steps? Doing nothing is not a reasonable step. You can't say, oh, well, I have nothing, so therefore there's nothing for anybody to violate. No, you have to have a reasonable policy in place. And investing in IT protection measures, and why do I say that? The client I had who had the ransomware, if he had a backup, who cares? Fine, I'll go back to yesterday. I'm not going to pay you your money, right? But he didn't have a backup. That's basic, I mean, I'm going to say to you, but that is, you know, if you're running a company, you need to back up your data. And if you're not being responsible enough to be able to do that, you're putting yourself more at risk. So there's a lot that you can do from an IT perspective. The other thing, the gentleman who's in charge of New Jersey cybersecurity, is somebody patching all your stuff. If you are your own IT consultant, do you know what it is that you're doing? Because if you would not hire yourself as an IT consultant, you may want to hire somebody with the actual knowledge as opposed to doing it yourself. Because these patches and everything that we're like, oh yeah, we'll get around to doing them, these are where the security risks are. We can get into whether or not Microsoft should be sued because they invariably put out a product that's got holes in it. I mean, if you were a car manufacturer and you put out a product that always has a problem with it, the way that Microsoft does when it puts things out, you'd be out of business. But we accept it in the software industry. In the event that there is a cyber issue, you should have a plan in place before it happens as to how it is that you're going to deal with it. From a PR perspective, from an investigatory perspective, do you know where your servers are so that if something happened to them, you can, who do you call about that? You know, what is sort of basic policies, and we'll go through this from the risk assessment side. In this plan, you're going to look at how do I prevent things from happening, both from an IT side and from having policies in place. If there is an incident, how am I going to go through the incident to be able to deal with it? How am I going to gather the information? And then very important, it comes down to reporting. There are notice requirements if you lose private confidential data, medical data, financial data. If you lose that kind of data, there are reporting requirements. In New Jersey, you're required to report to the state police before you let anybody else know about it. So you can't tell your customers, your vendors, anybody until you tell the state police. And the state police may tell you you're not allowed to tell anybody. Even though that may be in violation of, if you have a client in California, what you need to report in California. Why? Because the state police may be investigating it. So if you do have an incident, your reporting requirements are based on where the people live whose data was leaked. And if you have the kind of company, particularly a web-based company, where you have clients all over the country, you're subject to reporting requirements for clients all over the country. Now, David, I'm going to pick on you because we asked you to look at the reporting requirements of 5 states, right?
You did.
What was the overlap of those from a reporting requirements perspective, that I could do the same thing in each and every state?
So, and it's interesting you brought up New Jersey because we're one of, I think we are the only state that requires you to report to the police first, which obviously causes issues. Other states you have to immediately notify, well first, you have to immediately notify all your customers except, and there's usually, most states, again it's not all states because this is all different depending on the state, most states require that if you think the police investigation will reveal or telling your consumers will somehow impede that investigation, you cannot tell them. So I guess it's that first link. One, you have to ask yourself, if it's New Jersey, I always tell the police. If it's not New Jersey, if I tell my customers, will this impede the investigation? If the answer is no, then go ahead and tell your customers. If the answer is yes, depending on the state, make sure you contact the police. And some states require you get in writing from them. Some states say just as long as the police say, no, don't tell them. So it depends on which state you're in, but for the most part, they all have police exceptions.
Right, so with this, the key here is that if you have a checklist, some kind of policy in place in advance, when these issues happen, you're not going to be learning about them for the first time. That you know that you've noticed requirements, and okay, who is it that I have to notice? Not that you're panicking, your head's in the sand, and oh, by the way, you can't operate your company. You had a question.
Yeah, can I turn that on its head? So, an organization I lead was the subject of 2 spearfishing attacks within the last month. Now, fortunately, the treasurer is smart enough to recognize that these did not actually come from me.
Right.
And so no money left our coffers. One was a mail request, one was an email, wire the money. And one was mail it to this address, one was wire it to this address. A, is there any affirmative response required to report this? In other words, am I supposed to, having received this and having identifiable information as to where it came from, do I have any affirmative requirement to report it to authorities? And B, is there, if it isn't a requirement, is there any point in doing so? Or is it just, kind of spitting into the wind, and you're going to say it, you're going to tell somebody, but nothing's going to happen?
Well, I don't know if anything's going to happen, but in New Jersey, you have an affirmative requirement to report that to the state police, so that they have an opportunity to investigate that particular incident, because chances are you were not the only party that has been subject to that particular type of incident, and gathering information from your situation when added to information from 22 other situations may allow them to find whoever the perpetrator is in this particular situation. Now, does everybody know what spearfishing is? So, yeah.
I'll tell you, we got an email, it looked like it came, my treasurer got an email, looked like it came from me, very cleverly disguised, and it said, listen, I'm traveling, but I need you to send a check to the following individual in the amount of. And the second one was, very similar, but it was a wire to this bank and account number and routing number in a larger amount. This is happening a lot, and in fact there have been incidents where tens of millions of dollars have been stolen this way. Companies where the CFO gets an email from the CEO, says, listen, I'm in a meeting, don't bother me, just do this. And then they do it. And they send $1 million to a bank account someplace in China or elsewhere. And there is no recovering it. There's no, hey, I was defrauded. Which bank is going to give me my money back? It ain't going to be the case. If you're not aware of it, you don't have processes, you're out of luck.
I want to repeat your answer though, to make sure. I get one of those 5 times a week. I'm supposed to report every one of those to the police. Are the police going to laugh at me? I mean, I would.
No, it's not necessarily. Go ahead.
Got to be getting inundated.
So I have reported them to the police, and not just don't they laugh, they send a squad car over and they want to take down the information right off your computer.
So, with your business, Kathy, honestly, I would suggest developing a relationship with the person at the state police, and I'm not being facetious here at all. Say, look, this often comes up for me, this often comes up with my clients. I know that I'm supposed to report it. What's the best way of reporting this? Because in your case, reporting it to the local police, yes, it gets up to the right person, but it's the state police that actually investigates these particular types of incidents.
It was the state police car that came to my office.
Yeah, I mean, they take these very, very seriously because the numbers that are involved here. So what are the kinds of attacks that we can have policies and procedures about, okay? Insider attacks. This is by far the biggest type of attacks. These are employees, that they take your information, they go do something. I was almost very bad here. I asked Chris, because I need to get something from my thumb drive, from computer A to computer B, if I could have Chris's thumb drive. And I'm like, since I'm giving a talk on cybersecurity, I probably shouldn't be using it on no thumb drive. But it was, from an expediency perspective, I'm like, I've got it here, and I can't, these two don't connect to each other, right? Social engineering is the other thing that hits your employees. So the spearfishing is a kind of social engineering type of attack, because it could be that my person gets an email from me that says Dr. Wheatley-Liss at all caps Porzio.com, but the O in Porzio is a 0 because it's actually a different web address. And are you going to notice that? Maybe you are, probably not. The other thing that happens with the spearfishing attacks, and this was actually a litigation that we were involved in, is that the malicious parties were monitoring a business transaction, all the emails related to a business transaction, and once they got to the point where, okay, now we're going to send the wire information, that was the one email that they diverted to now put in, so the whole email trail is there, but they then put in their own wiring instructions. And any raise of hands, who thinks that misallocation, I think it was $2.8 million for the purchase of widgets, was covered by cyber insurance? Anybody who thinks that was covered by their cyber insurance policy? Yeah, no, that wasn't covered by anything. So that's why they're in court right now, because they're suing their insurance company to see why they believe that they should have coverage for this. So in this, they're very, very smart about this. So it may even just go back to, you know what, no one's allowed to issue money from your account unless they actually physically speak to you. I mean, it's old-fashioned, but a much more secure way of dealing with it in this day and age. Malware is the idea that you open up a link and they're able to go in and look at your information. Again, most of this, what they're looking for, are either medical records or financial records, all of which can be sold in the black market. I think a credit card, the last time I was told about this, goes for like $25 a pop, and a medical record will go for like $150 a pop. So again, that's what these systems are looking for. What can they gather that they're going to be able to then sell in the dark web to be able to capitalize on? And blackmail, we already sort of talked about. So what I want to do now is just turn it over to my colleagues Tom and Rob to talk about what is a risk assessment tool that you all can be utilizing in going through your own data that you have to create those policies and procedures.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thomas Eck. I'm relatively new to the firm, having joined on April 1st. April Fool's Day wasn't perhaps the best day to join, but everything's gone well so far. I'm of counsel with the firm. My practice is very primarily corporate and capital markets. And I've been working with Rob for the better part of 16 years.
Yeah, we came from, we had our own firm before we joined here in April. And we became interested in cybersecurity through a friendship we had with a gentleman who's the, if I remember his title correctly, he's the computer science professor at St. Peter's, and he's part of the Cybersecurity Center for Excellence down at the University of Maryland. We've contacted him in the context of some of the SEC directives that have come out relating to our hedge fund clients, our capital markets practice. And as we've spent time looking into this, it's really evolved. And I mean, that's the thing that struck me, is how big and complex and evolving it is. It's, as Deirdre said, it's imperative, I think, for every business, large and small, to really stay on top of this. So this risk assessment, I think, is a good sort of first step for every business to take.
Absolutely. You know, this is the thing that is probably the scariest to think of from the organizational perspective, is that there is, being in the United States, we have a system unlike Europe, which is essentially a blanket program. The United States is primarily piecemeal, and it's piecemeal on the federal level, which is particularly troublesome for companies because what kind of data you use, the kinds of people you correspond with, can impact which laws impact you. Then you add to that federal layer, you've got the state layer. And as Deirdre noted before, you may be a company in New Jersey, clients in California, and you have their personal information, and all of a sudden you have reporting requirements and obligations in California. Add to that, you may have clients in Europe, South America, Canada. You are now bringing in different protocols and different laws from these various areas. So it's imperative for the organization to really have a handle on their data, what data they have and how they're dealing with it. So I think the first step that we saw in terms of dealing with this is, okay, from whom are you getting sensitive data? Is it customers? Employees, it could be banks, it could be credit card issuers. There are various different areas from where you could be getting sensitive information. And from whom you get this information, for whom it applies, will impact your requirements. So, as an example, when you're dealing with customer information, Does your company deal with children, for example? So if you deal with children 13 years old or younger, you have COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule. And this governs what you can do with the information you obtain from children, the disclosures you have to make. States have their own laws addressing how you deal with customer information. For example, in New Jersey here, we have the New Jersey Identity Theft Prevention Act. And this not only governs what you have to do with customer information, but also employee information. For example, Social Security numbers. How you retain it and protect it, who you disclose it to, and then how you dispose of it. So it's very important to keep your first inquiry should be, what information do I have?
If I could just jump in terms of your customers, Tom mentioned children under 13. So that implicates a statute, I can't remember the name of it, Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule. So one of the questions you got to think about is, does my business, you said deal with children, that's kind of a subjective question. Do you have a site that could appeal to children in some way? I'll think of an example, Snapchat. That's, I'm going to say that's going to fall under the realm of Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. But that in itself is a subjective question. Do you have a gaming site that may or may not apply to children? So that's an assessment you're going to have to make. As Tom said, who is my site taking information from? Who is it appealing to? What kind of information? Addresses, email addresses, any sort of personally identifiable information. That's your sort of initial assessment.
Right, and then, continue our focus on New Jersey. New Jersey has various laws, especially in the employee context, that will limit what you can and cannot do with information you can obtain. For example, there is, it's called a ban the box law, and essentially it went into effect on March 1st, 2015, and it's called New Jersey's Opportunity to Compete Act, and it prohibits certain employers from obtaining criminal records of employees within a certain phase of the job search. Typically from the time that they first reach out to you until you've conducted your first interview. And this applies to employers with 15 or more employees over a 20 calendar week span. So you might think, I can go in, I have an interview, let me check on this guy. You may not necessarily be allowed to do so. And so this ties in again to that base inquiry as to who am I getting information from or about. And you really need to have a handle on that first, because that will guide the rest of your process. And another thing to think about is that, and most people probably don't know this in most companies, is that there are multiple statutes out there that require that you take certain reasonable precautions. And I'll give you just a handful of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the Federal Trade Commission Act. So, I think we can't impress upon you enough how important it is to figure out what information are you getting and who are you getting it.
So one of my clients has a CRM system, and they were using it for their internal employees to, they had their birthdays and their home addresses in there because it was for the emergency contacts. If something would happen to Tony while he was in the office, we would want to reach out to whoever Tony had designated as his emergency contact person. And they also had their birth dates in there because they were doing that to celebrate the birthdays, and all nice stuff. I advised them to, at a minimum, pull the birthday information out of the CRM and put that somewhere else. But what about the emergency contact information? Is that something they need to worry about too?
Oh yeah, that's personally identifiable information.
It's not always their home though. It could be some third party, their parents or whatever.
Right, but you see, I think...
So they wanted it, the idea behind it was, sound. They wanted it that, if I weren't around, someone else could call and reach out to Tony's emergency contact. So what do
Yeah,
they do in that, what would you advise in that situation? Have it just totally separate?
Well, I think one of the options you can do is you can separate the information. You could perhaps encrypt the birth dates, or, you know, one of the foundational things too is limiting who has access to the information. Because,
And this fits everybody.
you know, unfortunately, a third of data breaches occur based on it comes from the human side. Whether it's a disgruntled employee, it could be someone who accidentally downloads a file, puts it on their laptop, brings it home. We've heard more than enough stories about laptops stolen from cars, where information was contained. So I think, you know, limiting information on a need-to-know basis is easier said than done for the smaller entities sometimes, because you may wear many hats. But yeah, I think separating the information to the extent you can encrypt it, and I will tell you this from our own personal experience. Part of our practice is representing hedge funds, so they're fairly sophisticated clients with a lot of assets under management, and some time back we tried to encrypt all of our emails going in and out of our private firm. And I can't tell you how much pushback we got about that, because it required them to register the first time they went on, and that meant putting a name and clicking yes, accept. They literally, that's all they had to do. They had to fill in a couple of pieces of information on the first page and be done with it.
That's too much of a pain in the neck.
And they didn't want to do it.
And they've not been breached yet, so it's an unnecessary pain in the neck.
So if you've given them the means to encrypt it, but they've opted out, who's liable, them or you?
I think that is,
I'd say it's probably still you, just, you know.
but at least I can make,
Which unfortunately means us, but yes.
but as an attorney, we make an argument.
Right, because we, for example, we advise our clients, you need to make a facility available to them, to accountants in particular, so that your clients can submit their tax information in a secure way. They're like, well, we have no control over what the client does. If they choose to email it to me, that's their choice. Is that valid?
I think you are, no, I think as an organization, if you take the information, it's incumbent upon you to protect yourself.
Well, once it's in their
Ultimately,
environment, they
right.
protect it. But if the client
You can
chooses
certainly-
to email it to them,
Yes, and you can certainly recommend, but at the end of the day, the inquiry will be, were you reasonable in protecting your information? Even if you didn't ask for it, certainly they're going to say, well, you could have anticipated this, depending on the context. And what did you do? And this, it's a little similar to adhering to the corporate form. So if you have a corporation, you have to have certain meetings, you have to do certain things to keep that form. And it's relatively similar in the data security field in the sense that what have you done to protect your client's information? Have you been reasonable? And I think that is what, as a base case, is what you're trying to establish is, look, I've done A, B, C, D, E, and F. I've tried to the best of our company's ability, based on our size, to provide the adequate protections. Whether that works, it'll be a case-by-case basis, but it's incumbent upon you to look at your organization and say, what am I doing? Because that is where they're going to go.
Well, let me give an example here. So let's say that you collect Social Security numbers, because you've always collected Social Security numbers, but you don't use the Social Security numbers. So my question is, why are you collecting them? Because collecting Social Security numbers and storing them puts you at a higher level of risk, but if you don't need them, or something they've just always been on your form, that's the kind of question I would ask. If people are gathering this sensitive information, do you need the sensitive information? Right. And if you decide, yes, I do need the sensitive information, then you do need to take some kind of reasonable steps of maintaining its security. So maybe you want to turn to what are some of this, the types of information that could be collected that are particularly sensitive.
So, at this point, the organization's getting information from numerous areas, right? So you have sales information, these could be credit card numbers, these could be bank records, your marketing information, that could be tied into email addresses, contact information, fundraising, again, you're looking at financial records, amounts given, customer relations, many of these tie in, manufacturing. What processes, now this may not be data privacy as it faces outwardly, but inwardly. So do I have proprietary applications or processes I need to protect? And what is your organization doing to protect those as well? So it'll span the entire organization. You'll find that in some way or another, many parts of the organization are touching some kind of information that is sensitive or should be protected.
And what a business really needs to be concerned about are, the primary one I think is personally identifiable information. That's a name, last name and a first initial or a name, and social security number, driver's license number, an email address. There was a company that was sued recently for monitoring geolocation without the consent of their customers. So it's really, the personally identifiable information is really sort of a broad category. But in terms of liability for breach, I mean, there's intellectual property, trade secrets if you're dealing with customers or sales or marketing. It's financial information, payroll information, tax forms.
And also, it's important to keep in mind the source of the information again. For example, if you obtain lists of data from public records, that's a different story versus if you're obtaining information that's not otherwise publicly available, and you're getting that. If you go and purchase a list of potential client or contacts, that's a different story because that's publicly available versus something where you've established this database based on interactions with the clients, as an example.
Right. Generally, I think information that's publicly available, at least under the New Jersey Identity Theft Prevention Act, it's not actionable if that information is breached.
And tying into what Deirdre was saying earlier with social security numbers that perhaps are sent to you but you don't need them, you have an affirmative obligation under the New Jersey Theft Identification Prevention Act, we'll be cutting that up, to destroy it immediately and not to keep it. If you do not need it, you need to destroy it, dispose of it. And that brings its own set of requirements. Were you reasonable in how you dispose of this information? So going to the next topic is, so you have personal and sensitive information, but do you also share that information with third parties? For example, vendors. An interesting note here, Target, the big Target hack, that actually occurred because the hackers got in through an HVAC vendor to Target. So what information you share with the company, with a third-party vendor, system access that you provide, you really need to think about protecting yourself at the outset. So I would say that when dealing with vendors, the first thing I would do is find out how do they protect their information and see if those standards match up with yours. Are they more lax or are they stronger? Then I think you want to, in any contract you have with a vendor, you want this dealt with up front. You want specific clauses in there addressing data privacy. And I think as a third matter, I would want, as an organization, regardless of whether it results in a breach and a loss of client information, is any time there is an attack on your third-party vendor, and find out when there is an incident so that you can have an idea of what they're confronting.
Right. As third-party vendors, this gets to what we were saying before, limiting their access, least privileged access. That Target case is the most well-known example of a vendor who had access to Target's, I guess ultimately access to whatever information was in there that allowed the breachers to get credit card information. And another thing in terms of third-party vendors and service agreements you might have with them, I think it's important that not only do you require them to comply with your own internal security policies, but that you give yourself the right to audit those policies to ensure compliance on an ongoing basis. But third-party vendors is a huge potential liability for every company, as good as your own security might be.
Credit cards, how many people here take credit cards as a form of payment? Right? How do you take that form of payment? Like, did you take a credit card over the phone and plug it into your system yourself or something along those lines? So that's a huge amount of liability, because what ends up happening is that Visa doesn't actually issue credit, right? Visa is a bridge between banks that issue credits and the companies. So whenever these credit cards are stolen, somebody's looking for the lowest common denominator of who to hold responsible for the loss of information. If my credit card data gets stolen, I'm not responsible. I call Visa and I say, well, it's my credit card got stolen, somebody charged $5,000 on it, but it wasn't me, and Visa doesn't make me pay, right? So now Visa goes and they look at the bank and they say, well, bank, you have to pay, and the bank says, no, we're not the ones who allowed this to happen. So they've been going down the line to the lowest common denominator to be able to say who's going to be responsible for this, because the consumer is not responsible for charges when their card gets stolen. So if you have that information, you don't want to have that information, okay? So I would suggest to all of you that if you're dealing with credit cards, do them all only through those, I don't know, Kathy, if I'm calling it, those third-party access. Somebody else goes in and they type their information in.
The problem is that, and I just got off the phone with a PCI compliance officer like 2 days ago, is that there's lots of great, authorized.net and places like that that'll do the processing, but if they call into me and I take it over the phone and I haven't scanned my machine and my machine is compromised, even though I'm typing it into the authorized.net's website, I'm still the one that's liable because I haven't done my due diligence that you guys are talking about here in terms of PCI scanning.
Right.
So you should be doing internal and external vulnerability scans if you're taking them over the phone.
Yeah,
And if you're taking them internally any other way, you should be as well. But
Yeah.
that's
entirely different.
if you can get them to do it through the web, then it goes onto your website designers, your web hosting.
Yeah, all we want to do is make you not liable, just somebody else.
Right.
But how does that apply to like QuickBooks and things like that? Is that, if QuickBooks has a pay by credit card function, so I'm
Right.
actually receiving any information?
Well, and that's what I'm saying, from a best practice, that was the first thing that I was talking about, is from a best practices perspective, if you don't need the credit card information in that example, then set up a system where the credit card information is going somewhere else so that you don't end up being responsible for it. Because as soon as you do take the information, whether you needed it or not, you have this heightened level of responsibility. And go back to all those attacks I was talking about earlier, where these are not bad people who don't like you, who are looking for you. They are literally just sending out billions and billions of requests saying, can I get in there, and is there any, do I find anything that's XXX-XX-XX-XX, because that's probably a social security number, and do I find anything with 16 digits, because that's probably a credit card number. I mean, there's no one's thinking about you and how your company's too small. So best practices sometimes is not to take the information.
Right. And to numbers a Target example, I believe that Target, as part of their settlement, paid Visa, or one of the credit card companies, $40 or $50 million to recover their costs. So,
Yeah, the issuers are now, they're not sitting idly by, they're going after, because there are significant costs to them.
Sure.
From reissuing cards and having to go out there and they don't let anything pass anymore. So I can give you an example of there was a small t-shirt, retro t-shirt company in Pennsylvania on the internet making 80s retro t-shirts, and they were breached. I would like to say that a vice president, someone took their credit card information and started using it. And to that little company, they ended up spending $200,000 in remediation costs. It was a killer for them. It's a valid issue for companies big and small. From a little wine shop in California to a t-shirt maker in Pennsylvania to Target. So now once you've done an assessment of the information you have, one of your next steps is going to be determining which laws are impacting you. Is it U.S. law, or are you looking at also other? Do you have European law that may impact your organization? You will need to do an assessment of which laws will impact your company. That is not an easy inquiry. That takes some work.
and where are your customers? David, you may know this, breach notification laws. The laws that apply are where the customers are located. Is that correct?
It's correct. States are different on whether you're located here, and if a state doesn't have a law that applies, sometimes if you're in Texas and that state law doesn't apply, Texas law may apply. So, but for the most part, it's where the consumer is, and if there is an applicable law that covers that area.
Just to add on to that, but it's not only where your customers are, but where your data is. Who here uses cloud backup information to run everything? Anyone? right? Where's your data located? Is your data located here? Is your data located in Pennsylvania? Is your data located in Belgium?
In the cloud.
To the cloud. But guess what?
Mars.
The cloud does come back down somewhere. So one of the other things, I mean, Diane can speak about this, but if your data is located in a certain jurisdiction and that jurisdiction has more favorable laws than our jurisdiction, so our data is here, we have a backup somewhere in I don't know, some bomb shelter in Pennsylvania, right? So if we have a data breach here, let's say that all of our employee information is stolen. Now we've got a bunch of really unhappy employees and our employees have to be attorneys, so like they're noisy about this kind of thing. And Pennsylvania has more pleasant law from that perspective than New Jersey does. They get to use Pennsylvania law because we're utilizing services in Pennsylvania. So, and I'm not saying, like, well, I've got so many things to worry about with my company. The idea here is putting policies in place to minimize what the issues might be. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is insurance and trying to insure the risk that you can't minimize, so.
And one thing to not lose sight of is it's not just information that you have on your computers. It's any private, any personal information. Clean desk policies, making sure that that information isn't on your clients, on your employees' desks. Passwords, codes for getting into safes, wherever you keep that personal information. It may not be on your servers, but it may be in a file.
File drawers should be locked.
File drawers should be locked, exactly. And ideally, clean desk policy, though most desks I see would fail that quite easily. But that's important too. It's not just information on your servers. It's any personal information that your enterprise has.
Yeah, as Deirdre said, it's almost, it might be a cynical take on it, but it's almost less about ensuring you're not breached as ensuring that you've done everything you can and you're not going to be subject to liability through a suit, private suit, or some regulatory action or fine.
So it's managing the systems, like with a lot of business functions. So it's a matter of having everybody in their desk have a checklist and things they have to do at the end of the day and that kind of stuff. And if you can show that, then maybe you're okay, even if the employee doesn't.
Insulating yourself, I guess, as much as you can.
Changing passwords, not leaving passwords on desks.
Not making it
Right.
password.
Your goal is to take those steps that are reasonable for your company. You can't be expected typically to have the same protections that a multi-billion-dollar company would have, but you can still take protections even on a smaller scale to protect your customers and employees.
To Chris's point, anybody can lock a cabinet, and just so you don't think you're all alone, we're being engaged by a company that has 90,000 employees worldwide. Guess what they don't do with their personnel files? They're in cabinets. Their keys are in the locks in the cabinets. They just, nobody ever turns them and takes the keys out. 90,000 employee records. Right? So, having said that, one of their attorneys came to one of the other cyber seminars that we gave and changed that the next day when she got back. So I'm like, best CLE you ever went to. But just, you're not alone. So.
And so then, once you've done this assessment, the next step would be, does your organization have a plan? That would be the next step. And if so, does the plan address sensitive information and how to keep it secure? Because what you're going to want is you're going to want something that can be translated to the entire organization.
For anybody that's thinks that they may sell their business in the near or distant future, this is becoming a huge issue in M&A due diligence, is the cybersecurity preparedness of the target company. So that's just another thing to keep in mind in terms of your value as a potential seller. I did.
Okay. So you have a plan. Is your senior management actively involved? Have they bought into the plan? It's not enough to just have a plan. Look, I drafted this great plan, it's in my drawer. But the next step is, does senior management actually push compliance with the plan? Or have they bought in? And that's not always an easy sell. But that's important. It has to become an organizational goal to promote data security. Because it is that important. And unfortunately, it's one of those aspects of the organization that's easy to say, oh, I'm tired, I just don't have time today, I'll leave and I'll do it tomorrow. And you can be guilty of it with physical records and even with your computer. You might just pick, password that's.
So we have a client that it's a virtual, primarily virtual, and a lot of their employees work for other entities as well, because it's a recruiting, a telemarketing company. And so they have a policy that says you shall save your data in our secure, but if the employee doesn't follow the policy, what recourse does the employer have other than terminating them? Is none?
No, I mean,
That's my, because that was, she asked me, I'm like,
Well, but that should, you would probably have that documented with your review information and have all that kind of there, and maybe the employee's been on warning before or not, and had a perfect record and it was a one-time thing. I would imagine that would be part of it.
Well, what they do is they ask the employees to sign, and the employees do sign, but how do they prove? And the other twist to this particular piece is that the employee is using their own computer because they work for other people too. So they don't want anything from my client's system on theirs, yet they're still saving Word documents and Excel things on their local computer. And she has to essentially take the employee's word for it because she has no way to prove it.
Yeah, it's a tough situation because it's a personal computer, but to
Right.
the extent you can, to audit and have them bring in their personal devices and make sure that they are compliant. At the end of the day, you want to do everything that's within your power. At the end, if the employee decides to flout your rules despite best efforts, sadly, I mean, at least you may be able to deflect some you may be able to say, look, we did all that we could, and they just continue to violate our policies. And that may be an answer too, is terminating employees that do not follow policies. But in terms of any kind of monetary recovery from a telemarketer,
Right, I mean, because, I was trying to explain to her, you have an exposure here because you have no control. Of course, she doesn't want to spend the money to, I'm fine with that. But at the same time, I think business owners, they like this virtual model and this fact that, maybe they only have to pay the employee for part-time work or things of that nature, but they don't necessarily think through a lot of the legal ramifications of what they're doing.
it has a cost.
Yeah.
It has a cost. And in an organization like that, it's even more important to have some set of reasonable procedures in place to try and protect personal information.
Well, I think generally that's a bad practice, though, allowing your employees to do work for your company on their own
only
devices. Seems like an obvious.
Yeah.
We can't use our own devices here unless it goes through the
Yeah,
IT
but you're
department. And I think that is a good practice.
I agree with you, but I also know Tony, I'm gonna pick on him, relatively small business.
5 people.
5 people. He doesn't necessarily, maybe it's somebody that works for him 4 hours in a week. He doesn't necessarily want to buy them a computer to do that 4 hours worth of work. So he has to now, in his mind, evaluate what's the risk of letting them bring their own versus supplying one.
I have a question.
No.
I use an online software system.
Right.
I own a company called Fitness Coaching, and I do collect medical data because it's imperative to know what people's ailments are prior to working with them to be able to. Now, I have a filing system that's in a lock cabinet, but all of our data is put into this software system that we use. And I'm not sure if it's encrypted. I'm gonna contact them when I leave and make sure that it is encrypted information. But all of my trainers on staff have access to it.
Perhaps a potential answer there is a trainer has only access to the specific clients they work with.
That's what I was thinking. I don't know if that's even that knowledge.
And if she had a policy that would sort of just, lay out how they're allowed to use the information and so forth, would that also help strengthen her
Sure,
position?
absolutely. I think what you want to do is and look, you have to be realistic. The organization has to be able to do business.
Right.
So, but within how you do business, and what you're looking for are reasonable means to protect information.
Okay. Same thing with the credit card thing before that you were talking about, is most of the time, if I'm taking a credit card, initially, I don't, after my initial meeting with many of my clients, I don't necessarily meet them again in person unless I'm filling in for a session or that kind of thing. They're working with their trainer, they call them, they're happy, fine, bill me again. And we initially write out the information again, in a filing cabinet that's locked. And that information is put into our software system, and that's how we do billing. But again, like, what should I do with the credit, like, after I get the credit card information it's put in, should that, like, get shredded and disposed of? Is that better than keeping it in a filing cabinet, or is it?
Yes.
Should I keep it, should I keep it,
What if the credit card's over the phone? I mean,
Because
what
you
do other
shredded
people
it.
do with credit
People
card
would
information?
appreciate that.
What do you
Shred it,
Yeah.
shred it.
Shred
We
it?
shred it, yeah, we shred it.
Yeah, see, and reasonable practices, what do reasonable business people do? So that's some of the questions, so.
because it's an ongoing process, so it's always, and clients don't necessarily want to hear from my office manager once a month saying, hey, can I have your credit card information again?
But if it's in your software program,
Yeah,
then what you need to do is ask the software vendor, what are they doing to protect that information? You mentioned QuickBooks. QuickBooks stores them encrypted.
Right, they have a
And
recurring
the
feature as well for monthly.
That's right, and the problem is
They
if
do.
you, for some reason don't save it, you do have to call the client back and ask them again for their credit card.
And for your protection, we'd like to have your credit card again.
That's
If you
right,
Phrase it
yeah.
that way, they're like,
Yeah,
oh,
we
thank you.
shred
think they're gonna
it
object.
for your,
Thank you for
yeah,
protecting
exactly,
my
it's
credit.
Yeah, but
inconvenient.
they're gonna
but-
evaluate the service then every time also.
That's not that, but
It
has
is
anybody
true.
here not
Yes.
had their credit card number stolen?
I don't know.
Okay, you don't shop at Target, do you?
Does it buy
5, 6 to 10?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing, so I have to say from my standpoint as a consumer, every time our credit card number, it, gets stolen, I mean, the Target thing, I mean, it's, all the automatic payments that we have to go through and change again,
Yeah.
it's a huge time suck. I would much rather give you the card again and say from my perspective as a consumer.
Okay.
And I would much rather work with a company that cares about my confidential information than get a call from my credit card company, oh, did you just go purchase something in Germany? Be like, no, and that's gonna be another 20 hours of my life changing everything again. So I'm just saying that
most
from
of my
my
clients pay by
perspective-
check, but
Right.
I do have a few dozen clients that like to pay by credit
No,
card
look,
because they
I-
don't want me to bother them every
I
month.
only
They've
do that
actually
for
said that to
credit.
me on the phone. Can you just bill me without me you
Yeah.
calling me?
Well, apparently you guys need to talk about QuickBooks, so what else do you
Yeah.
guys have?
No, so the next step, now this may not always be practical, but does the organization have a chief information security officer? For the small entity, that's not practical typically. Maybe the president is the chief information security officer. Different hat, exactly. But to mid-size organizations, larger, there is a cost benefit to having one. Kroll did a study in 2014, and they figured the average cost of a data breach was $200 per record. And they figured, they do this, but they figured having a chief information security officer or someone of the like saved the victim approximately $10 per record. So there is a cost savings function for the entity. Because we've probably all heard this, but it's not a question of if you're hacked, it's when. And from personal experience, we can say, yeah, we've had to deal with it. And you're not safe because you're small. You're actually lower hanging fruit because you're small. They're, like Deirdre says, they're looking for everybody. They're just out there and massive. I sent Deirdre, I don't know, about a month ago, have you seen the movie War Games?
Oh,
So-
can you pull that up on there?
I can see if I can find the address then, but there is a real-time map that shows attempted data breach hacks going on around the globe, and it literally looks like that War Games picture at the end where the missiles are hitting everybody. It's constant. New Jersey, what was it, a million times?
1.4 billion
times
malicious hits a day.
a day. So at some point they're going to find you. They find just about everybody. So if the organization can afford it, having a CISO is a good idea. And then having that officer having the authority to oversee the organization and to enforce the policies. That's important too. There has to be teeth to it within the organization. Otherwise, the employees will figure out they're not doing anything about it anyway, so I'll just continue to operate as I have. It's
So our IT person is out of the state, out of the office this week. And Optimum calls the office, and since I own the company, I end up with a phone call. You have to close your port 53 on your server. This is Optimum telling me. What the hell is port 53? I don't have a freaking clue. But it scared the crap out of me. Because somebody else is doing something myself. Optimum's customers were complaining, and Optimum tracked it back to a port on our computer. Whatever the hell that means, I have no idea. I guess maybe within 24 hours, one of the team members' cell phone went dead and just became a paperweight. Ended up getting through the Sprint and finding out that somebody had taken his username and password and converted his plan into an international plan and was controlling the plan. Now I'm wondering what the hell's going on in the company with the IT stuff.
Yeah. Holy cow.
And I don't even know what to think or where to begin. What do
It's
I
like the
do?
Wild West.
Other than cut the wires? Sure.
Well, do you guys want to talk some about insurance? Because as much as we can mitigate risk,
Sure.
there is only so much that you can do, and there is cyber insurance that's available. There is, you have your standard business liability policies. Maybe just give some comments as to how we can look into those.
okay. Well, cybersecurity insurance is exploding now, but it's critical to understand and make sure that you're actually being covered for what you think you're being covered for. And so when it comes to getting cybersecurity insurance, I highly recommend getting an insurance lawyer to actually look at the policy. I think there are numerous cases of companies that thought they had coverage for X, Y, and Z and found out they had it for A, B, and C. And so the coverage is only good if it covers what you need it for. And I think that is, unfortunately, this thought that I'll just buy cybersecurity insurance, I'm covered. Now, that's not exactly how it works.
The key again is to do this risk assessment, so you know what applies to you, what information you have, what your potential liability is. I think that's imperative before you go out to buy cyber insurance. And I don't know if you mentioned it, Deirdre, but right, your standard business policy isn't going to protect you.
No, and if I could distill this all into a few points, I would say, from the organization perspective, take stock. Okay, so what information do I have? Scale down. If you don't need the information, get rid of it. Lock it. Whatever information you have, make sure it's protected. Pitch it. If you don't need it, dispose of it, and plan ahead. Create a plan now so that when a breach happens, you're ready to go. That's critical because you don't want to be confronted with the breach and now you're trying to plug holes. Be ready for it before it happens. And that's where the data is, that's where the assessment comes in, so that you are ready to go. And I would say this, and they'll talk about it more at the next meeting, I guess, is on breach response.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, it's critical to have an attorney who is your interface with your forensic experts and everyone else in the process and be protected by the attorney-client privilege.
So I learned something new about the legal world. There's an insurance attorney.
Oh yeah, Charlie.
No
Charlie
idea. I just assumed you would go to your regular business attorney.
Reading insurance policies for some people, there's allergies to that, and I have a terrible insurance policy allergy. It's very hard to read.
The reason why sometimes you specialist, so Charlie's job is if somebody makes a claim against an insurance company is to say why the insurance company doesn't have to cover the claim. So his entire very busy practice is dealing with why the insurance coverage that you pay for shouldn't cover what it is that you think it should cover. So therefore, he's very good at reading policies, make sure that the policies do cover what it is that you think that you're going to need. But particularly to Tom's point, you know, I think that, you know, as owners, what we can all do is mitigate what we're keeping. Don't take things that we need to have, and have some kind of policy in place. And again, even if you're a solopreneur, you're working with other people, whether it's your vendors, contractors, consultants, making sure that they're responsible for it, because at the end of the day, again, this credit card is the big thing. If the consumer doesn't have to pay when their credit card is stolen, who is gonna end up carrying over the loss at the end of the day? And I have to tell you, it's not gonna be Bank of America. So, you know, you just need to be able to, you know, to look out for that. Other questions you guys have for Tom and Rob at all? Anything
I have a
else?
question. I deal with a lot of medical records and health records, but I contract with a vendor who provides, we use that as a portal. So it's a patient portal, all our records go in there. I email with clients in and out of that, so it's encrypted, everybody gets password. To your point, I kind of demand that clients use it if we're gonna share any personal health information. I'll delete it right away. And they will send it, and I delete, because I can't accept that. However, I get concerned about if the vendor, is he well protected? It's HIPAA compliant, it's backed up, it's all this, and I actually can do invoicing, all my records are in there. I can enable some of my advocates, only the ones that are working on a case like me. So it all sounds good, but I get concerned that if he's breached, what's my liability? You know, his system, where everything gets dumped into, is breached, what is my liability for my clients that I have some of their records on that are, you know, we upload documents into it.
So do you have a contract with that vendor that actually,
That was a recommendation, so to get a B&B agreement.
you need to address in that contract what your expectations are and what they're actually doing? I didn't mean to jump in,
No,
guys,
that's
but
exactly it, indemnification for breaches, so that they come,
Because
they hold
I asked him
warrants.
about that, and he's got a lot of advocates using his system, but no, he doesn't have agreements like that, so I asked him about that. I'm gonna just present him with one. I think I'll have to do that.
It's definitely an indemnification provision, some kind of protection that if he's breached your health bonus, because that's not your loss to bear.
Right.
It shouldn't be at least.
Right. But you know, in the health field, when you talk about passwords, I also do some work with an orthopedic company, and we deal with doctors, surgeons, the nurses. I probably have 20 passcodes just for all the different, you can't get out of it now with hospitals.
right.
You know, you have a different code for each hospital, and I don't understand how they read, you know, so they read supposedly before they come out of their institution, they read the email, it's got personal health information, it's gonna go through the encrypted channel, and if it doesn't, it comes as an open email. Sometimes there's kind of private information, I don't know how it reads it, but I think that's the way in the future, we're gonna have 900 passwords.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way you can encrypt it, right, and get it. And I've had my clients go, I don't wanna use it, I'm not using it, I'm like,
You can use the LastPass or something like that to be able to keep all of them.
Right.
So, but I was actually speaking to Ken here, and you know, one of the questions that came up is if I am breached, who was in particularly New Jersey that I need to notify. I'm going to pick on Fort David here, and what I'm going to do is we'll send something around that's just, you know, based on the New Jersey data notification laws. If you see a breach, what is your actual responsiveness? And again, because here you have to give it to the state police first. When do you have these notification requirements? We'll put something together and send it out so you guys can take a look at it.
Great.
And to know those questions. And Ken actually just came up with a great idea, which is, so let's say you're a big company, right? And Ken, well, just give me the examples. I think it's a great idea.
No, I'm sure you get spoofs all the time from folks that pretend to be Verizon or one of your banks, or a bank that you aren't a customer of, but they're just sending it out generally. And you know, from the customer's perspective, I mean, from the bank or the Verizon or whoever's perspective, this is obviously problematic for them. It's either costing them money or it's costing them customer goodwill or whatever. Frankly, I would love to be able to figure out who at Verizon or Wells Fargo Bank or whatever to contact, because number one, I can't report it. I have no idea where to send information to say, hey, you guys are being hacked and it's affecting me. And number two, or spoofed. And number two, you know, from their perspective, if I had enough of this, I'd do it myself. I'd give a statement credit, you know, to, you know, on my phone bill to anybody who forwarded it, said, hey, here's the instructions. If you get hacked, you get a spoof, we want to know, send us this and we'll give you a, you know, a $5 credit on your phone bill. It would probably substantially cut down on the amount of the stuff that's going on, because companies like Verizon or Wells Fargo have the horsepower to be able to track this down. And I
Yeah,
gotta
but
tell you, it's
you
great to
can't
call the
stop
state police and they're
spoofing.
interested, they don't have the time to
Yeah.
follow all this stuff.
You can't stop spoofing technically 100%, so.
No, but you
It-
can
it-
certainly cut down on the volume a lot, I think.
I would hazard a guess that a place like Verizon has already done all of the things that they can do to stop a domain spoof. It is so, I could spoof you tomorrow
I'm
in a
not-
heartbeat,
Yeah.
and it would look like it came from you. You want me to, so.
Kathy's got that skill.
That's
Anybody who
It's
gets
a flaw in the
spoofed by
way,
Kathy,
well, no, it's a
I'll
flaw
take
in the
it
way
out of my
the email system is architected. And so, I mean, to me, I think until they start, you know, the original underlying email architecture, until they start addressing that, email spoofing is here to stay, so, yeah, that's just something, you know, it's, what you have to do is train your people to look for it and educate them on how to recognize a spoof versus something that's real.
Yeah, and my last comment on that is, let's say that you had an employee and maybe they had that niggling thought the second after they opened something that maybe I shouldn't have hit that link or something like
Yeah.
that. I would also have a very open policy about reporting that, one akin to
That's a good.
if your teenage child calls you, they get a free pass if they're like in a certain situation. You're like, you know what, you're not getting in trouble because you actually gave me the phone call kind of thing. I'd have like a free pass policy with your employees, because sometimes I think all of us have hit that thing. You're like, was that really from Bank of America? You know, something like that. In any event, I wanted to thank Rob and Tom so much for your time today. Thank you so much for educating us and giving us that information.
Thank you for having us.